Hold it! Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill him! Kill them both! Now, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
I'm going to let Bruce introduce himself and like he's a hyphenate like every guest really. And he has multiple, things he does and ways he identifies. And so I'll let him sort of describe those things, but I just want to welcome him to the show and say, thank you so much, Bruce, for coming on. And so I'm really excited and I hope I know we will have a fruitful and generative discussion.
Thank you so much. I believe so too. I really have enjoyed listening into your show from time to time, and it's always generating inspiration and different ideas. And it's good to hear other people with these kind of outsider type of spiritual views. So yeah, it's really it's a privilege. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. I mean, if you can make time all the way from, well, what seems like everybody's favorite island, archipelago, country these days, at least on Twitter, I very much appreciate it. So thank you so much. Bruce, how would you characterize yourself, your spirituality, your religious inclination, and like and give some backstory for people who are listening, like how you got into it and maybe even why?
All right. It's a lot, but so I generally call myself a based pagan, and that's because I started searching very young and outside of the Protestant tradition I was growing up in, and so also it's a bit of a little bit of my antinomian side to retain the label pagan, because I know these days that's kind of associated with obese, blue-haired, Harry Potter tattooed people waving athames in their local Unitarian church. And I'd been part of that. I discovered Wicca early when I was working at a library at my first job back in the 1980s. And so I found that, and I was searching into the Eastern traditions very early on. That was the time when the satanic panic was going on. I had my own little encounter with that in my small town way, because I was, an outsider, a weirdo, and I was into dark stuff and kind of a proto-goth, even though we didn't have that word for it yet. So I started searching into the occult and Eastern spirituality at a young age. And so I keep that term pagan, but I'm also very much sort of, I guess you would say, in the tantric realm, in the Shiva Shakti constellation of Bhakti yoga, devotional approach towards the pagan gods, because I'm non-Abrahamic. I've distanced myself from Abrahamic tradition because I found that to be, from a very young age, I found that to be not what I wanted and not what I believed and not what I found truth in. And I've been trying to find truth through my own understanding of spiritual things and encountering my own dark side. And I don't even know how to say it's all so much, but art and horror and spirituality, occult and Eastern have been all part of the, the spectrum of which I've passed through.
Well, I appreciate that greatly, Bruce, because I think for everybody, well, first of all, let me say this. Everybody who knows and listens to the show will know that I'm secretly inwardly excited because I so rarely get to flex my Shiva Shakti, my more, Shrivija tantric muscles with anyone else. So I'm really excited about that. But
Well,
I
I'm very
also
about it
thank
too.
you so much. But also I will say that I understand. I really do understand. I took a very different route. Like I was goth and I was very much a product of sort of my milieu of my sort of cosmopolitan I'm Eurasian, mixed race, Hafu, whatever you want to call it, Hapa, Wasian. We have so many titles nowadays. But I'm very much a part, like I'm very much raised within that, and I'm very comfortable within those kinds of what seemed at the time like different polarities, but now I see it much more unified, I guess, or maybe I've just learned to reconcile them within myself, which is very tantric, of course. And
Yeah.
so I definitely am not Abrahamic either, would definitely not claim the label, but I would say that like Pico della Mirandola and a lot of Hebrew Kabbalah have definitely influenced the way I speculatively approach the Western tradition. But again, I am a speculative Kabbalist rather than like I'm not in the Golden Dawn. I'm not like affiliated with any fraternal orders at all. Like completely 0%. My personal practice is strictly like tantric Buddhism. So in that way, I feel like we will relate a lot because I feel like the more I've gotten deeper into my practice, it's not that I have any dislike. I don't even revile like Christian things. I just feel less and less attached to them. Like even the sort of symbolism, it used to have like much more signification for me. And a lot of Tibetans will go into Catholic Church and see Mary and say, "Oh, it's Tara," or my dad's Chinese, a little different than your situation, Bruce. But like, a lot of Chinese people are very syncretic, and they'll be like, "Oh, Guan Yin, like no problem at all." But even for me
Yeah.
now, I have to say that it's less and less. So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
identify with that, and then also going through the dark side. I think that is a draw, especially if you're into magic or like occultism or the esoterica in general. Yeah, I think that a lot of that is partly a antinomian or transgressive pull against what we understand, at least at the time, to be orthodox and normative. But
Exactly.
now I would say now I'm not so sure. So
Hmm.
I think it's all in flux, maybe, but we can have that discussion.
Yes, yes, I agree. And be living here in Japan, I always had this pull towards Eastern culture, especially Japan and India. And now working, my job is as I'm teaching at a private Catholic school here in Osaka, and so it's very strange how that came about, very serendipitous, you could say, and just I attribute it a lot to my bhakti path to the mother, to the dark mother, and in all her many, in Shakti in all her many forms. uh, I'll even send you a picture later of the insignia of the school I work at appears almost like a trishula, like a downward pointing trishula. And that was almost kind of a sign also when I got, what do you say, recruited into that job. And it was all very serendipitous. We had our own private cafe, Eikaiwa, English private one-on-one tutoring business. But I was gravitating towards this. First, it was part time, and then I didn't realize till after the fact that I was actually being recruited to be full time. And but it just happened serendipitously that during COVID, our business was not able to be sustained, and so I had this cushion, and so it's like the mother was there to catch me, at the right time. So that's just kind of how I live my life, just like through devotion and just following where the path is leading, and trusting into my instincts, more than dogma.
So you're a true tantrika, is what I will say, Bruce. I mean, I have a lot of I have a lot of friends who are into Buddhism, who are into Dharma, who are into Tantra, who are into Dzogchen, all of those things, which are similar, maybe, but all sort of different at the same time. I often say this to them. Obviously, I take a more Buddhist, like a post-theistic view, but it's not really different. Like I could narrate it like how you narrate it and be perfectly fine with saying that. It just is maybe my sort of understanding of like who she is slightly different, but I wouldn't say it's in any way like I could easily pray with you and it would there would be no problem is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
And so but I think a lot of people do have a lot of Westerners do probably have a hard time with this kind of bhakti marga, but it's because it's not quite bhakti. It's not quite bhakti in the same way that if you go to a Protestant church or a mega church or an evangelical church, they will kind of expect you or proclaim your love for either Jesus or God. But it's a kind of deeper expectation, I think. And for me, I don't know, I'll let you respond, but for me, like in regards to Shakti or the Pranaparamita, I find it's just kind of a knowing. It's just kind of a I know it's gonna be okay, maybe not right away, but I have to put in the work as well, like do sadhana, make sure that I don't want to say vocalizing my problems, but addressing them in my own mind first, and then obviously I'll relate them to her as I can or as I will. But I always kind of feel like supported is what I guess I'm saying, and this is slightly I think is different. I think it's a very different approach. I think it's a lot more quote unquote Taoist. You're kind of allowing the marga to unflower before you. It's kind of a you have to kind of take a leap of faith almost, but
Ab-
it's there's something there when you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's there's Tara. She is the savior. It's she who carries us across the ocean, the samsara, the ocean of worldly existence. And she's that little ferry boat, you could say, that carries you across. And the left hand path is about stepping away from what is known and comfortable and clearly demarcated way for society to follow, and you decide to turn the opposite way and to discover it on your own, and trusting in whatever it is you want to call it, whether it's whatever your devotion is aimed towards. But there's that inner truth, that knowingness, that knowing within that, no, I'm not meant to go to church every Sunday, even though I think Jesus is cool. He was probably a sorcerer and was kind of a teaching people to look within. But the teachings, of course, over time they go through this arch, and then they ascend, and then they descend, and things are in that sense it was I couldn't relate to that whole the whole heaven and hell. I have some religious trauma, I suppose, from childhood, of that whole heaven and hell. That's what made me start searching, was if you don't follow this way, then you're going to go to hell. If you're not calling God by this name, then you're definitely going to hell. And I questioned that very early, like, what about the Native American Indians, and what about all the Buddhists and the Hindus? And it's like, it was just, that's what church was saying, was like, no, they are wrong, they are worshiping demons, they're all going to go to hell. So, and my occult side was like, demons, huh? And I just wanted to look more into that, and my fascination with horror and the dark side, that I was able to tap into that a bit, and in searching in books. And so finding things even in the Western left hand path traditions of that, I think it's kind of a stage that you go on, where you have to take that antinomian stance, where, all right, this is not for me, so I'm going to have to flip and do the opposite, and whether that be, Satanism or black magic, or, calling on darker forces, or excoriating God and hating God and blaming God for all your problems, and deciding I'm going to go with this other party. But that, I think, itself is part of a stage of growth, that it's necessary. I think adversity plays a huge part in our development. Just like if you were developing a muscle, you have to put some stress and strain on it if you wanted to develop. And that's what, education is to develop. And we have to educate ourselves, especially in this Kali Yuga time where, even if you find a guru, the chances of finding a real guru or someone to be trusted is very slim. We have to rely on that inner voice, that inner calling, and I find that I found that in a lot of the Eastern paths, and there are a lot of people pointing along the way, So I went to the left-hand path on the west side, and then I did, when I lived in Florida, I spent a lot of time in the Hindu community because I couldn't find that where I grew up. But when I moved down south, then there was a large immigrant population, and I could visit the temple and the mandirs. They had many were like first generation Indians, but they're also first, second, third generation Indians from the Caribbean, from Trinidad and Guyana, who had established themselves around Orlando. And so I was able to tap into the Eastern side because the Wicca and the goddess tradition, that was fine I needed that. And I needed the left-hand path. I needed the Satanism for a while to break through that. But I needed something with a tradition, something where there's an unbroken goddess worshiping tradition. And of course, I found that in Indian philosophy. So I started searching into Kali very early. Like I was still in high school, I think, when I got my first book on Kali, and I started painting her. And those days we didn't have the internet. It was just, whatever books I could lay my hands on. And that was how I started, just collecting hymns and devotional passages and discovering things through books, a lot of reading, a lot of reading, as I'm sure you know, and discovering how to, light a candle and to breathe and to chanting and, finding myself that way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, Bruce, this is how I've always explained the marga. I love that you said it is graded. That's very tantric. I hope that other people who are maybe just newer on their path, on their marga, I hope they all caught that, because that is a very tantric way to explain it. It is a graded path. And your first layer, your first density is going to be different than an orthodox sort of approach. Whether it's antinomian or transgressive, I don't know if you can necessarily frame it exactly, because I think it's like so distinct. Well, in Buddhism, we would obviously say it's a crooked path anyway. So you're going to get mixed up with sorcerers. You're going to get mixed up with abhicharya. It's inevitable. So it is part of it. It doesn't mean seek it out. It just means that, it's part of the contour of where you're going.
Right. The texture of your own experience in your day-to-day life, and things pop up, people along the way, and books come across into your hands, and then it's kind of, messages are being delivered all the time through the universe, you could say. And it's like, oh, I needed to read this at this time, or I needed to hear that phrase from this person at that time, or I needed to attend that public sabbat or that Hindu mandir at that time. Yeah.
I am curious about your time at the Hindu mandir, because I think this is important for other people who are seeking out more tantric ideas. I know you said you practice more of a Bhakti marga, which is more of a devotional love marga, which is obviously since the 17th century a very important way that Kali worship is undertaken. Not just Kali, but Kali and Tara actually can both be approached in this way. Obviously, you don't just have to be a Buddhist to approach Tara. She exists in obviously Indian Tantra as well. I'm sure you know this, Bruce, but a lot of people are always surprised when they hear me say that. But absolutely, Bhakti is very important. But I do want to ask about your time at the Mandir, simply because I think people have a very hard time accessing and also approaching sort of this, we'll call it subcontinental or South Asian knowledge, or practices at least, and sort of even making sense of them.
Yes. I was already involved in you could call it a kind of loose formed coven in Orlando, and I was one of the only two males in the group, and it lasted for over 10 years, maybe around 12 years, and it was a large group, like I said, mainly women, but they through this Wicca group, I was able to connect with these people, and we formed this offshoot group. And so they recognized my Bhakti path, my devotion towards the goddess. And so that was a good establishment to be in a group, in a community. But like I said, I wanted a more a textual tradition, something about goddess worship that, modern paganism and Wicca couldn't really provide, more than, since the 1950s or so. So I started seeking early, and I encountered, I could tell you so many stories. There's this, I was involved in a little cult once. It was all, they weren't in Hindu, but that was in Orlando, but I left that quickly. And then I just, there was this mandir that was on the side of I-4, on the side of the highway in Orlando. And I just passed by it, and it just said Shanti Mandir. And I would pass by it often, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to check this place out. Once in a while, you'd see a car or a few cars out front. Once in a while, many cars. It didn't seem to be very popular, but I just showed up there on a Sunday morning because I saw someone was always there on a Sunday morning. Not many. And it was this, I think they were from Guyana, based from Guyana, and they were Hindu, but like second generation Guyanese Indian. For people who don't know, people from India were brought over to the Caribbean to work, a century or two ago. And then, so they established a community in Florida. The climate's, very similar, in the Caribbean. So I just showed up with my, goddess Wicca pentagram stickers on the back of my car. And I just, just kind of went in. And, it's just, at first it was just this small family and maybe a couple other people who were there. And I mean, they had everything in there. It wasn't a major temple. They called it a mandir specifically. They didn't have a regular guru or swami who was established there, but just this family group. And they did the Havan, the fire ritual once a week. And they had the Ganesha, the Shiva Lingam. They had Rama, Sita, Durga. Yeah, they had all, and images of many gurus were there. And so I just kind of invited myself in, and I don't know if I would be able to do that these days, but I was still young and kind of, adventurous. So I just went in, and over time they got to trust me. And so I became a regular there, a regular devotee, and over time, more and more people started coming. Like they started getting more comfortable, I guess, with having a Westerner there. And it was, once in a while, we had quite a few people, but it was really nice. They welcomed me. At first, they were kind of like looking at me strange, and why is this guy showing up? And the same thing happened at what was it called? The main Hindu temple in Castleberry was the Hindu Association of Orlando or something, or Hindu Association. I forget what it's called, but the major temple there, they were like directly off the boat from India, people there. That was a big place. And they, I got a lot of weird looks, but it wasn't too unusual once in a while to have a Westerner just show up there. And so little by little, there were a couple other mandirs around town, but I always went to Shanti Mandir, and I met some nice people there. I actually got a job working for one of the people there for a while at a local tourist shop selling luggage and souvenirs. And it was really nice. People brought food, and they would chant and read from the Ramayana or the Bhagavad Gita, and just a regular fire ritual once a week. And so I got to learn a lot, hands-on practice. And after a while, they gave me a key to the place, and me and another friend who was kind of interested, we would go, and like he would cut the grass, and we'd clean up the place, and just offer some flowers and things here and there, and make garlands of flowers once in a while to put on Ganesha or Shiva. So they were definitely more of a Ramayana, a Rama worshipping based, but they had the other gods represented, and they understood I was into Kali, and I brought a little picture of Kali, and I framed, and I put that in front of the Durga statue there, and they permitted that. And so it was really neat way to learn mantras and rituals, the bhakti and the arati, how to do the the pujas, and very basic, just very simple, not too complex. And they were just doing the fire ritual themselves. A father of a family was leading the group, and pass around a microphone and take turns chanting bhajans and kirtans. So that was a really amazing growing experience. I was doing that at the same time as I was attending this goddess group in Orlando once a week about. And so I was having both the pagan Wicca goddess centered approach, and I was doing the Eastern tradition. They were not tantric, definitely, but I definitely feel I was just instinctually. But they understood I was a genuine seeker, so they became very comfortable with me, which I'm always grateful for. And I had that experience, being able to speak with these people and learn the mantras and see the general approach. They gave me this really nice old copy of the Ramayana, not the Tulsidas Ramayana, but the Ramachita Manasa. Not Tulsi, is it the Tulsidas version? No, yeah, it's the Tulsidas, not Valmiki, not the Valmiki Ramayana, but the Tulsidas Ramayana. And that itself, just the footnotes in there is enough to like give you a lot of understanding of the mystical and the tantric, which is, it's there, it's just below the surface. I mean, they have the exoteric and esoteric side of Buddhism, and it's there if you want to seek for it. You just have to peel back the skin of the water a little bit and look underneath, and it's just shimmering all under that deep the tantric vibe, which is what all that ritual is and the mantras are. That's all very tantric based. And yeah, so it was really nice to see people genuinely devoted and how they approach it, and their genuine kindliness towards allowing me into that community for a while.
That was a great story. Thank you so much for sharing, Bruce. Because of the diaspora my dad's from, which is Chinese Indonesian, actually, I know a lot of people from Guyana, Suriname, and other places. We call them Jawas. It's like a joke, obviously, it's Star Wars, but yes, in Indonesian and Bahasa, people from Java are actually called Jawas. So yeah, that's a kind of it's a joke with two meanings. So there are a lot of Jawas actually from certain parts of Central and South America, and they brought up with them the same kind of quote unquote Hinduism, and it is Hinduism, absolutely, but it is not quite the Hinduism of India. It is regional, but it's actually a lot more complete and it's a lot more archaic, meaning that they preserve, like Bruce is saying, a lot more of the householder practices, which I think a lot of people have, middle class Indians, I think, have really adopted the Adi Shankara kind of 5 deity worship of on the 7 days of the week. They have all it's much more, it's a little more atheistic. It's not as like, it's on Bhakti, but even you described like very tantric things that I would understand. Like, yes, mantra recitation can be very outer, exterior, but there's something very tantric about it as well, because it's the foundational tantric practice really at its heart. So it's like the first part of the marga, and also the last part of the marga. So I really love that you learn that, as well as like puja and homa, and I know you call it a havan, but we call it a homa, but it's very, I mean, I know they have that too, and it's a little different, but I understand. But I love, because that is part of it too. We would call that learning the Kriya Tantra, learning Kriya Yoga. So you would learn all those things as like a first stage student. You might not have any deeper understanding of the meaning of why you do this hand, or why you do it in this direction, of why you do it this many times, but you learn the rituals, so then you can apply the kind of deeper knowledge to them. So I love that you learn that, because that is a true tantric experience. Like, I know you said they weren't tantric, they were much more like Rama and Sita worshippers, but of course, Rama and Sita can be said to have tantric elements, certainly, especially if you relate them to Kamadeva and Ratri. And then you're getting into the whole like pantheon of Mahavijjas and how they all relate to Kamadeva, and how he's like sort of an integral part of that story. And then is Kamadeva really Shiva and Pavarti? Well, that's a very tantric question, right?
Yes, and at that Shanti Mandir also, like I would go on the Sunday mornings for the with the Guyanese Rama Sita worshippers, and we'd greet each other with Ram Ram. We wouldn't say Namaste. We would just say Ram Ram or Sita Ram, that was their greeting. But then in the afternoon, you had the ISKCON group come into the same building, and they set up and did their Krishna worship in the afternoons. So I would sometimes spend almost my whole Sunday at this place, and just because yeah, that was probably my first experience actually in the eastern side, was going to some ISKCON events, because I mean there wasn't really anything else available at the time. And that's a first stepping stone for a lot of Westerners to get into the Eastern thing, is because ISKCON is so widely available. But and so I appreciated that, and of course they always had the free food afterwards, which was always a good thing to have when you're young and poor and trying to save some money. So I appreciated that, and so I got to see that side. But they were like, and sometimes they would have larger groups, more come in of the ISKCON worshippers, and it was really interesting, the chanting and the kirtan. But to me, it was like fundamentally the same thing as fundamentalist Christianity. It was like, it's either Krishna or the highway. It's like you shouldn't worship Shiva, you shouldn't worship the goddess, you got to worship, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. And I think that's fine, but it's like not for me, if that's what you're into. But it just it's like Hindu fundamentalist Christianity basically to me.
Absolutely. I don't think you're wrong in saying that at all. I know we're going to upset some people saying that, but it is kind of the truth. And that is kind of like the whole idea of Krishna, is very much like a singular, very monistic quote slash monotheistic, I would say. Like there's definitely a very monotheistic component to that Bhakti Marga. But it is interesting that in West Bengal, that Kali often gets, I'm sure as you know, Bruce, often gets syncretized to Krishna, which is interesting because both of them have a deep relationship to Shani. So, in a more tantric way, maybe you could say Krishna is kind of the outer presentation of Kali, but you don't really get to see who she really is until you're much further along on the marga, which in terms of being a Krishna Bhakt, they say it takes thousands of lifetimes. So I don't know. I guess that's for them to figure out. And I'm gonna keep on doing tantra, but that's me.
Yes. And I'm rereading the Bhagavad Gita now at night before bed, and it's very good. It's so deep. You can get a lot of good philosophy out of Krishna and Arjuna's conversation, and also from the Ramayana. There's so much in there. Yeah, so many layers.
One thing I want to ask you about, Bruce, is how your practice and sort of orientation to different sort of spiritual ideas has changed, especially as now you live in Japan.
Yes, I've always, since I first came to Japan in 2004, and I met my now wife at that time, and we lived in America for a while, but then we relocated to Japan. But I've always been looking, because I noticed when visiting temples here in Japan, kind of doing the temple tourist circuit, seeing how all of these Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, they all have their Sanskrit names often underneath with the sign kind of saying this deity is this, or this image is this. And I was like, oh, the Sanskrit's there. It's like I could start to really connect. Oh, this is this, this is Indra, or this is Brahma, or this is, a very familiar character. But oftentimes the form is very different, sometimes shockingly different. But I was investigating, okay, so who is this character? And I was always looking for Kali. I'm always looking for the goddess. So of course, probably Kannon is, the closest I could find is, Juichimen Kannon, the 11-faced Kannon is, she's like everything. She literally has every face and every hand for everything. But you also discover with the fox worship, the kitsune, and which is related with Dakini, which I'm sure you know a lot about, and I want to hear a lot about. I would like to learn a lot about from you, is the Dakini worship. And so Dakini-ten is here in Japan, but most people, they just see the fox statues and they don't realize that that is Dakini. And and it relates to the images of Kali, where she has the wild dog at her feet, sniffing the blood, and the Dakini, which obviously is a flesh eater, blood drinker, spiritual sky dancer. But here it got this fox iconography, which I guess can connect with the wild dog, but also it's a protector of the rice fields. They keep the rat population down, and the rat leads us to Vinayaka and Kangi-ten also. So yeah, I've always been seeking. Oh, so the so many syncretisms here in Japan with the Hindu, the Taoist, the Buddhist, and it's really never ending. Like I cannot grasp it at all. I can only get a little bit of a little bit, and even that is enough to spend a lifetime just focusing on. There's so much to it.
As soon as you said Dakini-ten, Bruce, you had my attention. I was like, foxes, yeah. Dakini-ten? Okay, this is going exactly how I want it to go. So yes. It is interesting because obviously I don't know if I'm well known as a Kurokula practitioner, but it's associated with me in my account for sure. And it's associated also with my ideas of the Kalpa and moving through Kali Yuga and going into this more Sri Vidya, Tripura, Lalita Tripura Sundari, which is in their estimation, we're entering her Yuga now instead of it being strictly Kali Yuga, which is also the Buddhist and the Kala Chakra sort of speculative time cycle. We're entering into like this interstitial kind of what I call the Aeon of the Daughter. Other people have different sort of names for it, but most people can agree Aeon of the Daughter is pretty close because obviously the Dakini is 16 years old. I'm not saying that to be an edgelord. Obviously, you know this, Bruce, but that is the kind of conceptual idea of her. So she is pre-conceptual, meaning that she's generative, but she is not Lambodaro. She's not pregnant. She's not, she doesn't have a consort yet. So, right. So the idea is like Kurokula, well, at least in my thinking, I think that, so I've had several episodes, actually, like 4 or 5 episodes specifically on Japanese esoteric Buddhism. And my understanding of the system of Japanese esoteric Buddhism was quite different at that point, I would say, than it is now. Now I take more of a approach to the Tantras that actually perhaps Japan did receive at least portions of higher Tantras, but predominantly I think what they received were mandalas, meaning iconographic depictions of higher tantras, but not necessarily with the exact specific text, maybe fragments of the text, but not complete cycles. So we don't even have complete cycles of most texts in obviously Tibetan, Sanskrit, or Newari. So that is part and parcel of being a tantric, is that you have to kind of accept that the canon is incomplete in a degree. Like you just kind of are okay with it. Like that's how I've kind of reconciled that. You kind of just say, okay, we have the text that we have and it is what it is. But through the practice, through the mantra, maybe we can, do something interesting. So yeah, I think that Japan did receive portions of the text, but predominantly the mandalas. Obviously, Lotus Sutra and the texts that are preferred, the sutra texts that are preferred in Japan, have a deep esoteric layer, like you were saying with the Ramayana. That, of course, has an esoteric layer, but so do the sutras. Now, the Lotus Sutra is not a Pranaparamita Sutra, meaning that it's not specifically cited as an esoteric sutra, but it can definitely be understood in a tantric way. Now, it focuses primarily on wrathful compassion, which I thought was really interesting, especially when you're talking about 11-face Kwannon, because obviously in Tantric Buddhism, she can also have a very wrathful face, or several faces of the 11 can be extremely wrathful, but her primary face is obviously deeply compassionate. So we would focus more on emptiness in Tibetan Buddhism, but Japan, even esoteric Japanese Buddhism tends to focus on wrathful compassion. So I do think that that's a very interesting kind of distinction, because you have obviously the later Tibetan schools like the Gelugpa, they really promote this idea of bodhicitta. So we're obviously all converging on the similar ideas, but maybe we haven't all quite got there yet. But Dakini-ten, okay. So obviously Kurokula is found in the earliest compilation of Buddhist tantras, which are called the Sadhanamala, which came about in about the 3rd to the 8th century. Why is it such a huge time difference? Is because they existed fragmentary and then obviously were compiled later on, but they still exist in fragments to this, like the oldest pieces still exist, but then they were obviously compiled and perhaps edited and revised, as all those things of course were. So she's a very important part of this original Tantra, we could say. She's part of a grouping of 5 goddesses. I can't even remember them all at this exact second, but they're all practiced both in esoteric Buddhism of Japan and Tibet still to this day. And they all have, of course, Indian tantric equivalents. So, Kurukula, she is associated with a fox-like dog called a dhole. So this is obviously very similar to how Kali is depicted, as you said, with either a pariah dog or a jackal.
Yeah.
Now, there is a deep tantric kind of layers that all the goddesses, all the Mahavijja in particular, are associated with specific kinds of carnal denizens. Like Chinnamastika, the goddess with the severed head, she's associated with a golden eagle. That's very important. Kali is often associated with vultures. That's very important. But they can also have mammals specifically associated with them, like Kali and the jackal, Kali and the pariah dog. Those go one to one. So Kurukula, and she's associated with these things called dholes. So it's very interesting when you look at her sort of worship move into China. In fact, when you look at it, she also gets associated with foxes, because obviously dholes are the predominant sort of hidden dogs, we'll call them, the outcast Chandali dogs, right? Because that's her position in the mandala. She's an outsider. She's not a transgressive goddess necessarily, but she's an outcast goddess, meaning that she's a forest or mountain goddess. So she exists as a huntress, sort of outside of normative society. So she's associated with dogs that are very rarely seen by humanity, which obviously is more similar to a fox. Dholes are a little more secretive, but we're updating for cultural preferences. So eventually, I assume what happens is she makes her way over to Japan, both in these lower tantric forms, meaning that more activity, what we would call activity forms, forms for love, for victory, for magical activity. She's very much associated with all magical activity.
Yes.
But then also probably in her higher tantric forms, which is like Havajra Tantra, certain parts of Chakra Samvara, certain parts of the Yogini Tantras, she becomes a much higher goddess. So you could say that she exists in a very interesting kind of non-dual, very Buddhist way, where she's both at once sort of very magical, very ferocious, very worldly being, and at the same time, she's the highest Buddha.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, I hope I did an okay job, Bruce. I apologize. It's my favorite topic, so
I'm absorbing it. I'm just absorbing it. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I didn't want to, overwhelm the conversation or anything.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me because I've always, found, the goddess is kind of like the center of my universe. The goddess Shiva. And so I always sought for that here in Japan too, and Kanon and Dakini-ten have been a big part of that. And I found that you probably know about Fushimi Inari in Kyoto. There's a famous mountain shrine, very popular with tourists. It's seen in the movies with many torii gateways up the mountainside. And I found that mountain is also connected with a trinity, which is Dakini-ten, Kangi-ten, and is it Benten or Benzai-ten? One, I think it was Benzai-ten, the Japanese Saraswati. I get confused, Benten and Benzai-ten. One is a Lakshmi, one is a Saraswati in Japanese, but their names are similar, so I forget which one's which. And sometimes they merge Saraswati and Lakshmi in the Japanese pantheon.
That's very interesting, Bruce, that you say about the merging. Sorry to interrupt you. But because they do often, even in Indonesian Hinduism, they often merge. Even in Indian Hinduism, like even in Tantra, that Lakshmi and Saraswati, because they both are originally river goddesses, right? The Saraswati River still exists. The Lakshmi River dried up. So it makes sense that you would occasionally merge them together, like their understanding, if they started out as part of like the cult of the Indus Valley. You would
Yeah.
occasionally merge them together, just like they were actually merged together at one point. And their functions are very similar. They're both very sattvic goddesses.
Yes.
They're both associated with a blessing, vidya of a kind, very normative, orthodox knowledge, of course, but it makes also sense. It's very solar energy in a way, especially Saraswati. She's always worshipped like usually on a Sunday. Most of her holidays are solar in nature more than lunar. And then of course you would have who we would call Ganapati, who is a very dualistic, you could say he is of both the right and the left hand, especially for in Buddhism. He can be a very dangerous fellow sometimes, very cool, but I like him too. I'm not saying anything bad about him, but I'm saying he can be very dualistic if you don't understand um, how to deal with it. And then, of course, the Dakini-ten. So you would have normative kind of learning knowledge. You would have his boon, which would be sort of like a not secret knowledge, but kind of hidden knowledge, maybe. And then you would have her, Kurkula or Dakini-ten, who would be secret knowledge. So you would have like the three layers of meaning: orthodox, more inner, magical, maybe, and then, of course, secret. So that actually makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes, very much so. This year on the New Year's Day, I went by myself to Ikoma Shrine, which is the center of Kangi-ten worship here in Japan, and I was lucky enough to get there early enough. But and there's a huge line of people, and when I left, it was even longer, like down almost all the way down to the station. And you know these shrines, they go quite far up, so many steps up to the mountain, and so yeah, the Kangi-ten, the Japanese Ganesha, it's considered Hibutsu, a hidden Buddha. It's secret. The shrines are always, the images of the shrines are always kept hidden. It's very rare to find one that's open to the public, because it's considered too potent with occult power, magical power. And like my wife, she's Japanese, and what she tells me is that he's also called Shoten, or interestingly, he's also called Seiten, which is interesting in the left-hand path sense. But he can be like you think of like a yakuza boss, like a gangster lord. He has all the power down to the underbelly of society, all the way up, to the highest reaches, and he has those powers with his pasha and his goad, the ankusha and the pasha, the noose and the goad, and his blessing, or the tusk, the broken tusk he carries. But in Japanese iconography, sometimes he's shown singly holding a daikon radish, but also he's often shown in a dual form, the male and female embracing, which is very rare. But fortunately, we actually obtained an image, and we have housed here in our home shrine. It's very rare to find one that size, and I want to find out how it was made, when it was made. I can't even tell you who made it or when it's from, what time period it's from, but possibly not that long ago. But it's by the size of it, and it must have been made in Japan, I suppose, but it could have been made in India or Nepal, perhaps, if they had someone who paid the artist, to create it. But just by lucky chance, we obtained it. And just in the past couple of years, for me personally, Ganesha has just been coming into our lives. I wasn't even like searching for it, or anything. It just kept coming home to us. Like my wife would go to a secondhand store, and she's like, "Oh, look, I found a Ganesha," and she'd bring it home. It was like, just sitting on the shelf, very reasonable, like nishaku-en or sambyaku-en or something, like $2 or $3 or something. And all these Ganeshas just kept coming here because I think they feel comfortable in our home, and they like the joy of the children. Kangi means joy. And so the joy and the laughter and that energy, that lively kind of joyful energy. So I think Kangi-ten or Ganesha just feels comfortable in here. So we're very grateful for that blessing, that energy. And so we do our best as we can to make offerings, as we're able. Usually these things are considered not to be, kept in a home. Even generally, they're to be kept in a shrine or something. But I did manage to make a cabinet to close them in, so that's a little more secure feeling. And because that power is something that needs to be balanced, it needs to be adored, it needs to be revered, and it deserves offerings. So when we are able to do that, we do that as we can with sweets and flowers and sake and such. But yeah, it's really interesting to find that cult of Ganesha worship here in Japan, and it's very popular quite everywhere, but you don't see it, you don't hear about it. It's just hidden, hibutsu, really. But my concern is that these traditions are fading very fast. The younger Japanese generation, they really do not appreciate Buddhism or Shintoism even. It's just kind of they go once a year at New Year's and they clap and they make a wish, but a lot of them, they don't study, they don't know the deeper levels of it. So I really hope that the younger generation of Japanese will appreciate and maintain these traditions. It seems to be, the elderly generation dying off. A lot of things are going to be lost. So hopefully these things can be maintained.
Well, you said so many interesting things there, Bruce. Where should I even kind of start? Well, Ragaraja, that's how we would call him, obviously, in Tibetan Buddhism. I like him a lot personally. I don't know if I'm telling on myself or.
Is this Aizen Myo?
No, it's not Aizen-myo. It's Ganapati with consort. And his consort is Vinaramukhi, the monkey-headed Dakini. So
yes.
it's kind of the transgressive joke in a way.
Yes.
Obviously. So
I know the image you mean. I know.
Yes. So it's a very powerful kind of it's a red practice, so it's a magnetizing, but it has other functions as well. But it's really a wealth practice is really what it is. And it's very cool. I really like him. But even for someone like me who's more of a Buddhist and less necessarily inclined to his tantric practices per se, other than the one I just obviously said, which is extremely tantric, very guya, very secret. What I like about him is that even for an outer practitioner like myself, just to have the one mantra empowerment or the one mantra recitation of a semi-secret mantra doesn't even have to be most of his tantras were forgotten, which is interesting, or were lost. Obviously, it's said that in his original Marga, there were 22 canons of his practices. And sometimes there was 33 even. There was a secret 11 if you completed all 22 stages of the Marga, there was a secret 11 for the very secret, the very highly accomplished Siddhi practitioner. So he's a very interesting deity. I've always thought of him very much as in terms of path working. And if you want to compare it to the Kabbalistic tree, I think he is the deity of the paths, very much so.
Lord of categories, right?
Correct, exactly. And the outer gateway protector. And so what he builds, he has to take from somewhere. And that is sort of what is his dualistic nature, is that it's not that he's necessarily dualistic in quality himself. It's just that he cannot create from nothing. He must create from something. So if you go to him with a specific request or boon or whatever it is, he actually has to draw it from somewhere else where maybe you have more karma or more, substance. So, if you want, that's how, at least this is this is a very Buddhist way to explain it, Bruce. So I'm not trying to offend anyone or any Hindus listening or anyone like that. It's just a very Buddhist way to sort of reconcile him. But I do find him very fascinating. I do like that you said he's a quote unquote satanic figure. I agree with you very much. I think that he is very adversarial. I think Yakuza Boss is the perfect example. I cannot wait to go look that up when we're done recording, to see who else has sort of thought of that idea and see if they've put it onto paper.
I don't know. I think that's just my wife. She's my priestess. She's my guru. She's truly an oracle, and she just has an instinct about these things. I'm all busy like studying and reading and trying to understand the stuff. She just kind of instinctively knows these things. So I trust in her.
Women are the Dakini. I
Yeah.
always say this. It's so true. Women are so much more connected to wisdom, right? Because they have a womb. So they have an innate relation to what we would call in Buddhism emptiness. That doesn't
That's
mean nothingness. That's just
right.
like luminousness and masslessness, just like a Dakini is. They don't have
All
any
potentiality.
exact all potentiality, the ability to become Lambodara, pregnant
Yes.
with the worlds. So
Yeah.
absolutely, the women are much more connected and men are much more the path workers. We have to learn and we have to
Right.
practice, and it
Yeah.
doesn't
We have to
come
work through
intuitively to
everything.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
It is interesting, right? And like and all these paradoxes can be so easily resolved, right? Because it's like, yeah, obviously, I don't focus on Ganapati or Kongi-ten, but absolutely can appreciate it from my, my Buddhist perspective. He completely makes sense. He's very much of the Aeon, if you want to switch into more OTO terms,
Mhm.
or even Kala Chakra terms. Like he is very much of this current time. He's often depicted with Kurukula actually in
Uh,
iconography.
I didn't know that.
Yes, in the Sakya school, the Sakyapa, he is depicted with Hayagriva, so the horse head one.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, the Buddha, not Vishnu, not the Avatara, but the the Hayagriva, the Vajrakroda Hayagriva, and then Kurukula, and then Ganapati or Kongi-ten. They're usually depicted as a triad, just like the Saraswati, Kongi-ten, Kurukula, Dakini-ten images. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. The exact same meaning. So, Hayagriva obviously is the sort of, in Buddhism, at least we could say, the Saraswati is his consort because
Okay.
he is just like in the avatar of Vishnu, he is the avatar of learning. So you could say, okay,
Okay.
in a way, it makes sense that Saraswati is paired with him. So it doesn't really matter which one you worship. Either or is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I just it's just my instinctive path. I focus on the Shiva Shakti constellation, and of course Ganesha is a part of that. So I see Kangi-ten as just another branch of that mandala or that family, and it's just the Ganesha has made his presence so known to us in the past couple of years. It could not be refused, and I had to what do you say, answer to that. I had to respond to that. So my practice in the past, especially year or so, has been more focused on Ganapati and Kanki-ten. But of course, the goddess is always part of that, and Shiva is always a part of that. I have my shrine behind me. I have a Shiva lingam with a Dionysus dish behind it, and I have Kangi-ten and Ganesha and Kali and Durga. So that's just the constellation that resonates with my heart, and I just, that's what I have to go towards. So yeah.
I totally agree with that. I mean, if you look at my my altar behind me, it's not, obviously I don't have any quote unquote European or i.e. pagan things, but I do have like a Maheshwara Shiva.
Mm,
We would obviously call him a little, it's we call him Maheshwara or Ishvara, protector
mm,
of the Lord of the worlds.
mm.
And I have a Kali, and it's, yes, it's a Kali. It's not a Sri Devi Palden Lama, but of course those are also the same character. Just like
Yes.
just like the Dalai Lama practices Matangi, he just calls
Ah,
her, he calls her, I'm gonna forget her name on recording, of course, but she is also a Sri Devi. So it's always relative. It's always relative. Like all these things are so deeply interrelated, I think. Like
my
especially
con-
Buddhism and Hinduism, just so deeply, and but of course it's all you're interrelated with the European stuff too. People make too big of a deal about the, and I know people probably will think I'm guilty of this, but I'm not really. There is a way to logically like understand them as descending or being interrelated with each other, and it's not just like a theosophical, like it's all one thing. It is kind of like an exercise of wisdom science to like figure out, okay, what is the actual relationship between this and this? Is there one, or do I want there to be one? Because those are two different questions.
right.
And right, and so
Yes.
but I do actually think that there is a like a coherent sort of linguistic map that one could make, but it would require someone who's so excellent in both systems, so diligent as a scholar. It is very difficult. So I actually appreciate the Bhakti approach where you're going to do the best you can with the deities that arise in your own life, because that actually, from a Buddhist perspective anyway, would refer to your own karma. So as the deities arise in the forms that will help best ameliorate your karma, especially
Yes,
for tantric.
right. So being kind of instinctively tantric, and the bhakti just feels like the safe path. I don't want to overstep the bounds by like trying to commit to something I just cannot accomplish, because my time is very limited with what I can do in front of my shrine on a daily basis, and with family around, and being in a household situation. So I just find the bhakti path is safe. If you're doing it through devotional, through love, but you can also add in the Buddhist, the void, and the I mean, all of that. The battle cry of the Eastern religions is seek detachment. So we do what we can with the tools we have at hand. So we can seek detachment, but I have to be in the world and of the world, and I have responsibilities to maintain. So yeah, using that, my devotional constellation of the Shiva Shakti family is very appropriate, I feel. And less chance of me going too far astray and doing something I should not do.
I'm very much a middle path person, but I'm also very much in favor of, like, quote unquote, the aeon of householders. I'm not a monastic. I'm not into shramana. I'm not like a particular left hand path. Like, yes, I'm left hand path because all tantra is maybe at its heart non-dual, but at least in an outer presentation can certainly be understood and read as left hand path. Now, is that exactly the same as what most people think of it? Probably not, but I understand it in maybe a more deeper way. So I'll call it for what it is. It's definitely a little more left hand path, but I tend to the middle as much as I can. That isn't necessarily a synthesis. It's not necessarily in the middle of the two polarities of right hand and left hand. Maybe it's its own secret third thing. Maybe Longchenpa often says the middle path is actually a positionless position. So that's a really interesting paradox for people to sort of contemplate, right? And so I definitely believe in using the practices to amend the world as it is, in meaning that your own life, but also choosing practices that are going to be karmically fruitful for you, meaning that things that are going to help rectify, repair, and also generate good karma for the future. So I'm not like a Buddhist who's like anti-magic, or like, I know exactly what it is. I know exactly what it means to recite a mantra. I know exactly what it means to do puja. I know that it of course you want higher altruistic bodhicitta, of course, and all those nice things. But we're in the real world, as you very much said. So we also have to be pragmatic and realistic, and our spirituality has to also match that, I think. So I'm very much with you. I agree very much that, Tantra is very much for right now. I think there's a good mind training in it. I'm not just talking about Buddhist Tantra. I think it's a good mind training. I think there's a lot of tools in it that you can use to sort of, reality in tantra is a lot more flexible than I think a lot of this, Bruce,
Oh
as a lot
yes.
of Western religions would think that reality is a lot more fixed. We tend to think of things as a very unfixed, as very more chaotic, a little more random, and that is more
Very much.
how it is. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. As an artist, it's like sometimes it's hard to say, what even is reality at this point, and some things are very, mauve zone-ish, and it's a twilight kind of path that we take between the left and the right, and trying to maintain a balance. Yeah, maybe a little bit more left, but on a practical householder side, So
I like that you brought up Kenneth Grant. One of my co-hosts calls him Kenny G. It's always funny. Shout outs to Tola.
that's great.
It is funny. He's the Andy Kaufman of the gang. So I like that you brought that up, though, because I think very much the OTO and the Typhonian order in there, even though I consider myself kind of a little bit better at Kabbalah than maybe they were, I don't know, but I like to think of myself, I have a little bit of an ego, Bruce, so sorry. But I tend to think that actually they got a lot of things right to be honest. Like I know I'm kind of poking fun of them and making a little joke at their expense, but I think honestly the some of the story makes sense in an Eastern perspective. I think the tunnels of Set make a lot of sense in the Rahu Ketu kind of like way that that is explained. I think the tunnels of Set also make a lot of sense in terms of like Ekajati, as we would call her, or Chamunda, meaning the primordial Barbello, the primordial grandmother. She is spent. She is no longer Lambodara. She's no longer Kali. She like all the blood has gone out into the worlds to create the world, like to create the, you know, the ocean of blood before her, where the Jambu Vipa, the Mount Meru exists, where we live. So, you know, or you can say her corpse is the Mahasmashana upon which we dwell. So that's also a valid way to explain it. So I think a lot of what they're talking about is, to a degree, completely understandable from a dharmic lens. Now, you just have to be a little flexible and a little willing to take their you know, they took it in a different way. They did they you know, they embellished it differently than
Right.
you know, than like a Kashmiri or a Nepali would. They would embellish it in a different way. But the, you know, Kenneth Grant, he took it in his own way. Crowley took it in his own way.
Yeah.
But I think you can understand a lot of what they're talking about through Dharma, actually, is my experience anyway. But I'd love to hear what you
Yes.
think of that.
Yes. Yeah. I think so. It's like uh, Kenneth Grant was one of the first introductions I had to like real Western left-hand path beyond the, you know, the more base level stuff. It was trying to first, you know, the first few books in his Typhonian trilogies are really good, really, really good. But as you go on through the trilogies, it gets more esoteric and more idiosyncratic and more, you really have to kind of try to, if you want to, try to dissect it, but it's perhaps best not to dissect it, but to just kind of go with the flow. And like, I will go through like page after page and page of some of Kenneth Grant's books, and I'll be like, what is this guy talking about? But on a subconscious level, you are getting some of it. It's like his style of writing and presenting these ideas is very Twilight Zone-ish. It's very, you know, some of it sinks in, and I kind of instinctually kind of get some of it, but don't ask me to try to explain too much of it. But definitely having a background reading hymns to Kali, hymns to the goddess by Sir Arthur Avalon or John Woodruff, having that, you know, with the footnotes provided before reading Kenneth Grant, that helped me a lot, having that tantric base, because then I was able to get what he was talking about with the Suvasinis and the Sandhya, the twilight language, and of interpreting the tantric scriptures and dhyanas and dharanis and such, using that through the lens of that twilight language. It helps to interpret some of it. But when he gets into like the UFOs and some of the alien things, it's like, okay, I kind of, it's interesting, but you know, I don't have to accept all of it. But I just
100%.
yeah, I just want to try to grasp, you know, different ideas. I like to hear what different viewpoints are, because I don't consider myself as having, you know, the ultimate truth, and or anyone having the ultimate truth, but we're all just kind of feeling different parts of the elephant and kind of expressing what we're experiencing. So I like to hear, you know, other esoteric ideas, which is, you know, listening to your show has been really great while I was constructing some of these shrines I've been making for my statues. I was listening to your show while creating some of them, and that was just really nice, just to have, you know, something to listen to, that, because, you know, I need something esoteric to fill me up, to fulfill me. I can't, you know, be satisfied with, you know, other things usually, you know. So it's always inspiring to hear other people's ideas and their interpretations of these things, because it opens up my perspective a lot more.
Well, I'm really flattered to hear you say that, Bruce, to be honest, like legit, honestly. It's kind. Thank you so much for saying that. Like, you know, my show's not monetized. My show is definitely I consider myself like a sorcerer. I would always joke. I'm sure you've heard me say it. Sorcerer on the carnal ground, sorcerer on the Smashana. I'm nothing else but that. Maybe a monkey king sometimes. I practice Buddhism and I practice Tantra. So that's all I know in this world. But I consider it like a show. It's a show for magicians. It's a show for other people like me who are like yourself, not fulfilled by things that are not deeply esoteric, maybe more intermediate. Yeah, my show is not for someone who's just like, oh, what is Wicca? Like maybe I'm definitely not, my show's not going to be for them. But
No.
if you're interested in deeper tantric ideas or Kabbalah, or like I love that you brought up Sir Arthur Avalon. I have not ever done a show on him. I've long wanted to. I find his text to be very important, seminal.
Yes,
He obviously
very.
was one of the first Westerners to be ever. He went to the ninth Marga, so he made it all the way, as we would say, all the way at the end of Kali Kola, and he also got initiated into Sri Vijaya. I don't know how deeply, but to some degree, because he understood the at least a little of the difference between the Sri Tripura Lalita Sundari Shastras, the texts that prescribe that kind of ritual worship. I don't know why I can't speak. Obviously, my Vok maybe is a little blocked today, but I apologize to Ganesh if that is true. But
Block.
yeah, I think he's such an interesting figure. I think him and his wife, that they were Westerners, that they went all the way, that they did this very transgressive kind of Kali Kola practice. It's just like it's a whole. This is the thing, Bruce. I don't know if you know this, maybe you do. I'm very fascinated by the Choseth Yogini cult of like the 9th and 10th centuries, how syncretic it was, how it wasn't so distinct between Hindu and Buddhist, how it was very much Buddhist, but there was like obviously Hindu elements. It wasn't excluding the other kinds of tantras, but it really was focused much more on it wasn't so much Kali Kola. It was definitely much more focused on Buddhist ideas or perhaps even Sri Vijaya ideas. Of course, there were Kali Kola elements. That's inevitable. Even Kamakya Temple, I'm sure as you know, it is a technically it's a Tripura Sundari cult, but they use a Kali Kola Shastra. So even in that, it's still syncretic. It's very tantric. That is how it's always done. It doesn't really make sense. There's always a paradox, but it makes sense to people who know that wisdom is free and empty in space. Anyways, I'm sorry I didn't mean to rant about that, but you got on several topics, Bruce, that are very exciting and interesting to me.
Oh, that's great, because I don't have a chance to speak with anyone else about these things. So this is really great to have this opportunity.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to maybe for our last 20 minutes, we will talk about like more Japanese kinds of ideas, if you don't mind. Like,
Sure.
I know maybe you know that I'm very interested in Fudo. I don't necessarily practice it in a Japanese way, but we obviously have like a Nepali tantric equivalent. What do you think of his worship as it currently exists in Japan? Are you interested in him? If you are, I don't know if you don't have to relate anything in particular, but I just I want to hear your thoughts on him or Aizen-myo. I like Aizen-myo a lot. We do also have him in Tibetan Tantra. I know a lot of people will say they don't know who he is. He makes perfect sense to me. Raja, the Lust King. So yes, by their Sanskrit name, you shall know what their real name is. So that's usually how we understand it. So you have to go with that.
Okay. Yeah, Fudo-Myoo is very big here. I mean, he's very big, and the main Kangi-ten or Shoten shrines that I and my family visit are also Fudo-Myoo shrines are there also, like housed in their own temple. So they're very much connected here, I believe, with the Shoten worship and Fudo-Myoo. I see Fudo-Myoo as a form of Shiva in my way, in my sense of perceiving things. I suppose as Achalanata because of Arunachala, Shiva in India. So I kind of associate it that way. I suppose some might see it as more of a Vishnu expression from a Hindu perspective, but I see him definitely as more of a Shiva characteristic. He carries this flaming sword wreathed with a serpent or dragon up the sword. And this shrine, this Shoten or Kangi-ten shrine we visit here in Osaka, there's a pond in the garden there, and there's this huge one of those in the center of the pond, a huge sword with flame wreathed with this dragon on top. And I have a little miniature one here, actually. I keep on next to my Shiva icon. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a double dorje with a dragon wreathed around the blade of the sword. This is always associated in the Fudo-Myoo temples I visited, and his expression, it's not non-symmetrical. The left and the right are non-symmetrical in his face, which is very interesting. So I know his mantra, but I don't practice him so much. I generally stick more usually with the Sanskrit words, because the Japanese expressions of these are quite different. But I found with my connection with Ganesha or Kangi-ten, I've gotten more comfortable with the Japanese form of the mantra. But Sanskrit is like the root syllable, the most root magical language, I think. So I usually stick with Sanskrit, but for Kangi-ten, I'm using the Japanese ones. So Fudo-Myoo is very popular here. I don't see Aizen-Myoo as much or as often. He is known, of course, but Fudo-Myoo is much more commonly seen here.
I love that you said that about his iconography. So I'll start with from the beginning of everything. That's amazing. I think consider it like it's the lightning strike sword. So it's like the strike of lightning from the primordial Buddha, from the Adi Buddha, you could say, maybe Vajrasattva. Yeah. So it's him coming down in the form of a lightning strike. He hits the primordial ground. What arises? Smoke. So it's like Rahu Ketu kind of. So it has to climb all the way back up into the non-returner realms. That's how I understand it. Obviously, I take a more obviously Central Asianist approach, but I do have a particular and sort of unrepentant love of Fudo in the Tibetan version, or the Nuwari version. So I agree with that. I also agree that he is much more Shiva-like. I mean, there's if you, I'm not telling anyone to read the text, but if you read any of his texts, some of his epithets are also the same, like Batukaya. So it's inevitable that you would associate. Obviously, that's what it's meant in a tantric way, is that you're meant to associate them, at least in the form of Shiva or whomever it is. I wouldn't say that that's his final apotheosis, but maybe that's a more tantric thing we won't talk about today, or at least on recording. Maybe off totally is fine, but right. But I do think it's interesting you made that connection, because it's very obvious in the textual layer that they have a at least one-to-one relationship in iconography. I love that you mentioned the duality of his iconography of his face, because it's very much like the central axis in the body, the nadi channel. Because in Buddhism we say there are 10 directions, 8 exist outside of you, 2 exist exactly. One is one is made of meteorite, and the other one is a subtle channel made of smoke. That's exactly how we would describe it in Tantra, right? So it's the Rahu and the Ketu. So just like the sword. And so yeah, exactly. I think it's the two polarities. It's the twin polarities. One is going up, one is going down. How do you reconcile that? Where do you reconcile that? Well, in a more Central Asian Tibetan Buddhist way, we would say in your mind. That might not be the exact way that they understand it in Japanese Buddhism. So I'm definitely not giving a teaching. I don't know anything about esoteric Japanese Buddhism other than what I've ever read or what people have taught me. So I can't speak on it at all. But I can also say that I agree with what Bruce said about Sanskrit. It's not that I dislike the Japanese mantras for anything. I don't. I will sometimes use a more Tibetan pronunciation. It depends on the Dharani, depends on the deity, it depends on the mantra, and it depends on my familiarity with it. But I prefer to use as much of a Sanskrit mantra as possible. It's my preference. I'm not saying it's the only way I know how to do it. That's not true. I think
Right.
sometimes the Siddham script, whether that's understood in Japanese or understood in Chinese, obviously Mandarin, I think, yeah, that can be very potent and powerful. But I think that a lot of those mantras that are turned into colloquial language, they tend to lose a little bit of power. So they take a lot more recitations, a lot more practice, a lot more familiarity to really make them work.
I
It's
think
not that
so.
they don't have power. They
Right.
definitely do, and I'm not denigrating them in any way, but I agree. What Bruce said, it's Sanskrit's kind of primordial.
I totally get that, and yeah, like I was saying with this dragon sword, Dorje dragon sword that Fudo sama holds, it kind of makes me think of the Kundalini Shakti, the Sushumna, the spine with the lunar and solar, Ida Pingala balance. So perhaps that is one way people can practice within themselves, and Fudo is like a protector. And so, if you are going to do shoten or kangi-ten practice, Fudo is there as like a guide or a protector along the way. I think that's why he's always present at the kangi-ten shrines that I've been to. And it's odd because it's very syncretic. When I go to the kangi-ten, shoten shrines, they they are Buddhist. They're Buddhist temples, but they also have the Shinto Tori gateway always. So that's not usually at a Buddhist shrine, but at all the Shoten shrines, which are more kind of magical and kind of yeah, more of a magical thing. And then Fudo is always there as like a companion deity, almost always on the same grounds, not housed in the same building. But Shoten or Kangi-ten is always housed with a Kanon sama, always. They are never separated. There's always a Shoten-san, usually hidden in a kind of lingam-formed shrine, and with a Kanon, usually either behind or in front of, somewhere in there, while Fudo would be in a separate building nearby. And what else was I going to say? And yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. But,
Don't worry about that because I have a really interesting point. I don't know if you can tell me if you find it interesting, Bruce. But what you just described is really a tantric temple complex, because you would have a Durga or a Chamunda or that kind of figure with a Ganapati. Obviously, we would call him Ganapati, but Kanki-ten or Shoten, obviously the same. But yeah, we would have the mother there, right, to control a little bit of his dualism, to sort of
right.
bring the higher deity, the higher supernal force of the stars. Rather, he has a very worldly, earthy nature. So we want to go a little bit more transcendent. So you have the higher power to sort of bring the hosts. He is the Ganapati, so he's the king of hosts or lord of hosts. So you don't necessarily want those hosts around. So you bring in the higher supernal force to sort of keep everything orderly. And that also is what Fudo does. He's actually functions exactly like a Shiva. Not Shiva as in like the higher deity Shiva, but a Kistrapala, meaning a ground protector. Like literally that's what it means, a field protector. And it's always in the northeast corner. So this is sometimes considered a very inauspicious part of tantric architecture or Indian Vastu architecture, because it is the carnal.
Gate, right?
The demon gate, correct. See, okay, so Bruce already knew, so I couldn't even surprise him with that. But thank you so much, Bruce. Yes, the demon gate. It is the gate to the. It's a gate to an underworld that is not populated by anything that we can deal with, really. So Kistrapala, or sometimes it's depicted as riding a bear or a giant black wolf or a 9-headed dog, anything like that. It is very ferocious, but it is, yes, a form of Shiva or a form of Mahakala. That's how we would describe it. Obviously, Mahakala, Shiva aren't quite the same, but they're close. And so we're just going to pretend, we'll just like turn off our high IQ, syncretic brains. Exactly. Sometimes you just have to let it go a little bit. You're right. Exactly. Yeah. So he's a form of Mahakala. So he protects the whole mandala. And that is what a temple grounds is. A temple ground is a mandala. People think a mandala is just like a tanka, a painting on a thing with a text and a commentary. No, the mandala is actually the world that we dwell within. And so what people would do when they build a temple is they would build a temple that approximates a mandala, So you would activate as many quote unquote star gates or magical gates as possible. So you mentioned the Tori gate. Well, gates in, especially in Nuwari Tantra, are very important. You have to walk through all the gates of Kathmandu before you can accomplish Vajrayogini. So that's at least a myth, right? So it's at least a tall tale or a story that they tell. So it's
That's
very
interesting.
similar idea. You have to
Yeah.
cross through the liminal places to achieve the higher deity.
In the Japanese mandala that has Kangi-ten in it, very near him is the Mahakala. They're very next to each other in the northeast portion of the mandala. Yeah, so that's another interesting point where you mentioned where we were talking about Fudo-Myoo and Kangi-ten or Ganesha being in the same region or paired near each other or by each other. So it's again that kind of Shiva, Shakti, Ganapati constellation. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, if we're going to go Puranic cosmology, we'd have to say he's the son of Shiva and Shakti, of course. We could also say, maybe this will be more interesting to you, Bruce, than any listener, but I'll just say it because it's nearing the end and I think it's kind of interesting, is that you could also consider Fudo a form of skanda, a kind of tantric form of skanda. So this becomes very interesting in like a broader tantric discussion of like who is skanda or who is kila or who is vajra kalaya, because those are all sort of the same and sort of different, and like what makes them the same and what makes them different. But Fudo can actually be understood as a son of Shiva as well. So it can be both Batukaya, as in Shiva, but it can also be a skanda, or at least maybe more Buddhist form of Vajra Kumara. That maybe that's the better word, Vajra Kumara, son, the Diamond Thunder son. So he can be both. So he is actually a very good pairing to Kangi-ten in many ways.
Yes, as brothers and yeah, part of the same constellation. And also
Exactly.
you mentioned what was it, Omyodo or Abino Seimei. There's a shrine here in Osaka. I want to visit it again with my family. It's been several years since I've been there, but it's a very, well, there's the main Abino Seimei Jinja or shrine is in Kyoto, which is quite famous and very magical. With pentagrams and the Torii Gateway and pentagrams on everything. I got a necktie there that has pentagrams all over it. But there's another one here in South Osaka, I think, or Central Osaka, like the old business district, that is a shrine dedicated to Kuzu no Ha, which was Abino Seimei's mother, who was said to be a fox. And
yes, a Dakini.
This shrine, I think, Jen, you would really be interested in, because this is like kind of downtown family sorcery kind of shrine. Like you'll see like all sorts of interesting objects laying around, and like people have obviously done some magic things there on their own. Like there's broken eggshells, and there's white snake statuettes, and all these sort of things. And the foxes, of course, are everywhere. Because she's said to have been kind of this kind of lycanthrope, or not lycanthrope, but a fox woman fox. And so Abino Seimei is this half fox character, this sorcerer character.
Just like Padmasambhava. They said his mother was a fox Dakini as well. Sometimes some stories say that. I always thought it was very interesting.
Yeah,
they share that.
It's really neat. Yeah, that shrine. I want to go back there again, because it's very like, it's not like, you can feel it's very folksy. It's not like a very popular or anything for the tourists. It's just more like the people who live in that area use that, and they do their magic there. You can see it's very fascinating.
It's funny, Bruce, because some people think that I'm very like highbrow. I'm like a kind of a snob, a magic snob, but really you clocked me the best of everyone that's ever been on the show. You knew I would like folk magic. I like that kind of down at home, downtown. I love that. And there's actually an anime, so I can't take full credit in knowing something. There's a really great 90s anime called Abenobashi, Magical Arcade, which takes place at that shrine. So two little kids get transported with their Osaka accents as they dub in American. They have Southern accents, but obviously they have Osaka accents in the Japanese version, and they get transported to these various anime worlds where all of these tropes, all these like crazy, all the tropes, mecha, ecchi, fanservice, all that, it all gets made fun of. So they all kind of like are like, this is so ridiculous. This is like not reality. But it's actually a whole lesson of Abe no Seimei taking them on a magical kind of journey. So I
Wow.
love that you kind of brought us there right at the end, because I don't know, I have a really deep fascination with him, Bruce. Like, I often joke my mother is a fox goddess. Like, I've joked to other people about this. My
Mm,
dad practices Kabatinan, which is like a kind of Indonesian folk sorcery mixed with like
mm,
Kabbalah, Sufism, a little Tantra, but not like Mantak Chia kind of stuff, but more serious, more conservative, and
mm,
like Hinduism, Buddhism. It's all mixed together, right? A
right.
little Taoism. But anyways, yeah, so I always like made that joke, and so I wonder if is did I make the joke and then feel connected to him because of the joke, or am I actually just drawn to him just as a fellow sorcerer, a fellow miracle worker, you could say, um, just because I am, but I don't know. I just always am very fascinated by him and Onmyodo as a system, and just the
Yeah.
stories around him. I feel very uh compelled, I guess. And I love that you brought up the folk sorcery, and because I think people associate Japan with being very staid and boring and not dharmic. And
Right.
I know you were kind of like, a lot of the older traditions are dying out. And this is something that I felt too as a more traditional Buddhist. Like, people are not as interested in like deity yoga or like all these other practices, but it is preserved in certain things. Like, anime is very like subtle dharma or dharma light. There's a lot of
Yes.
ideas in it, right? And so
Yeah.
you just have to hope that the seeds are well preserved enough that when people are ready to revive them, they'll be able
Yes.
to do so in a
I
skillful
think
way.
so. You're right in that. Even if it were all to be wiped away, it would arise again spontaneously at some point because it's instinct within the cosmic system, so to say. But it's so nice to see. Like recently, the anime series my kids are into now is called the Kitsume no Yaiba. It's the Demon Slayer, or is it Demon
Yes.
Slayer or Demon Hunter? Yeah, it's very popular here, and it's so dharmic. It's so Japanese and so Shinto. I mean, and all even and it's like, the Japanese. It's not in the West we always have good versus evil, whereas
Yes.
in the Japanese you have like even the evil demons have a backstory as to why they suffered and became that form, and their destruction is actually a release. It's so very dharmic and Buddhist, in its own way. So it's a great series, and I'd recommend it if anyone's into that anime.
Absolutely. I mean, I've done many episodes on anime, Bruce. I feel like there's a definite hermeneutic in anime. I'm not saying it's perfect or anything, but I don't know if any system is really perfect, to be perfectly honest. I think you have to really practice, as you know. It's a lot of work, it's a long time, it's not instantaneous. No matter what any master says, yes, maybe one Vajrayogini mantra might take someone who's very powerful away, and like they can skyfly in one day, but most people, most of us normies, we have a couple lifetimes to go. So, you have
You're
to get
right.
practicing in this lifetime. But I
Right.
greatly appreciate like everything that you said. I sincerely invite you on anytime you want to ever come on again and have like a part two. We can discuss anything you want. I'm very happy to host you. Thank you so much, Bruce. I really sincerely appreciate it. It was great to speak to someone who is kind of like me in many ways. Is like the kind of far ranging, multinational, able to think in multiple systems as well as refer to Western esoterica. So a really amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you so much, Jin. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Do you want to plug your Twitter so people can follow you? And I'll make sure that that is in the show notes if you want to. You don't have to, but
Okay.
I will.
On Twitter, it's at Sunny Gardner. That's SonnyGardner.